Okay, today we are going to be working on percent of a number. We worked on this a little bit in our first lesson when we talked about percents and what a percent was. But now we're going to be expanding on it a little bit more, finding the three different parts. So part of a whole, a percent, and the whole number that we started with. We're going to start first by looking at finding the part. So part equals percent times a whole number. So what you do to find a part is you take your percent times your number that you know. So your whole number. So we take and we turn our 20% into a decimal by moving our decimal point to the left. So we have 0.2 times 50. So we take 50 times 0.2. We get 100, but don't forget we have to add in that one decimal place. So we move our decimal in 1, so we end up with 10. Another way to think about this is in the form of equivalent fractions. It's clear. So we want to know that 20% is 20 out of 100 equals what out of 50? Well, this is a nice one that we can just write equivalent fractions with. So we take 100 divided by 2, so then we take 20 divided by 2 equals 10. So our part is 10. So 20% of 50 is 10. But if we didn't have a nice number that we could write equivalent fractions, we can use cross simplifying or cross solving. So you take 20 times 50, so we multiply these two numbers. We take 20 times 50, and then we divide by our third number, divided by 100. So we get 1,000 divided by 100 equals 10. So that's three different ways that we could have solved this problem. We can do the multiplication, we can do equivalent fractions, or we can do the cross products. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to try one of those three methods to find 35% of 70. When you're done, raise your hand and I will come check it. So now let's look at how we could solve that one. We have, what is 35% of 70? So, one way we can solve that is to use the proportions. So we have 35 over 100 equals what out of 70? So 70 isn't one of those nice numbers. So we take 35 times 70. So we go 0. And that goes 7 times 5 is 35. 7 times 3 is 21, plus 3 is 24. Then we divide that by 100, or we move our decimal 2 places to the left. So we end up with 24.5. So 0.35 times 70 equals 24.5. Our next section that we're going to look at is part finding a percent, which we worked on a little bit this week already too. So what is the percent, or what percent of 15 is 12? So once again, there's a few different ways that we can solve this problem. We can use division. We can take 12 out of 15. So we take 12 divided by 15. So we put our decimal, bring our decimal up, and we figure out how many times does 15 go into 120. So we take, it's going to go in there about 8 times. So 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 4 is 12. So we have 0.8. So 0.8 we now need to turn in to a percent. So to turn it into a percent, we move our decimal 1, 2 places to the right, and we add in that 0. So that equals 80%. Or another way we can do it is to set it up like equivalent fractions. So we want to know what percent out of 100 equals 12 out of 15. So once again, we don't have a nice number that we can make an equivalent fraction. So we're going to use that cross products. So we look and we take our diagonals times each other. So we take 100 times 12, and then we're going to divide by the third number. So then we divide by 15. So we take 1200 divided by 15, we get 80%. So now let's try this one. Try that one by yourself. Oops, sorry. Let's try this one by ourselves and see how we can do it. What is 80? What percent of 80 is 65? So you're going to take 80 out of, or 65 out of 80. So we're going to take, and we're going to take 65 out of 80 equals what out of 100? So we take 65 times 100, and we get 6,500. Then we divide by 80. So we take 6,500 divided by 80. So it doesn't go into our first two numbers. 80 goes into 650. What times 8 is closest to 65? Well, that would be 8, because 8 times 8 is 64. Then we have 10 left over, so we bring it down. How many times does 80 go into 100? We have, it goes in there one time. 8 times 1 is 80. So we have 20 left over. Add a 0 and a decimal. Drop it down. How many times does 80 go into 200? 2 times. So 8 times 2 is 16. Drop it down. We have 4. Add one more 0. Drop it down. How many times does 80 go into 400? 5 times, because 5 times 8 is 40. So we end up with 81 and 225%. So we have 81 and 25 hundredths of a percent. Then we have our last wedge. Part, finding our whole. So we know our percent and we know the part of the number. So we're finding this of. What is our whole number? So for that one, we take our part divided by our percent. So 95 is 25% of what number? So like before, we have our 95, then we take and we move our decimal 2 places to the left to turn it to a decimal, and we get 0.25. So we take 95 divided by 0.25. Or we can set it up with our ratios, and we